Hi, this is a short lecture on um, creating women's theology, and it's meant to give you just a brief introduction of process thought. And this book, which I wrote part of it as well, as Monica Coleman did, an author that we just read earlier, and along with Nancy Howell, one of our colleagues. And what we've done is we've tried to create an opportunity for women who are writing in process theology to come together and to share insights. And the introduction here is going to give you an overview of process thought and of process women's thought. And so I think it'll be a helpful introduction before you move into Suhaki's work on divinity and diversity, in which she's going to talk about, basically, she's going to give us kind of an overview, almost a little mini systematic theology of how to think about Christian theology from the perspective of a process theologian who's also a feminist and who's focused on how we can create a theology that is unique and not unique, but it is respectful of and gives importance to the fact that we are Christians, while at the same time, it enables us to maintain those Christian commitments that we have, while at the same time does not demonize or say we are Christian as opposed to these other religions which are wrong, but rather we're Christian in because of our context and because of our beliefs, and that there is a way in which God is present and with in whatever way it can be understood in other religions as well. But first, we're going to get a little bit of a brief introduction to process theology. So I encourage you to read the 2 chapters that I've photocopied or scanned, I should say, and put on the Populi for you. And here there's a PowerPoint also that I created, and I'm going to go through that briefly and give you a little more of a lecture. And I hope that you'll watch that as you're reading along with the PowerPoint after you've read the material, or even a little before the material, and then go back to the material and reading it. Note also that there is a little video of Monica Coleman that I've asked you to take a look at as well. Okay. So I've created this video, the short video for you to help you understand process theology. And looking at the book that I've asked you to read, Creating Women's Theology, an introduction to process, so women's thought. And I've lost the little picture, but I think I have a picture of it there. So what I've asked you to do is to think about this text, and shoot, I wish I had the picture. I'll bring it to class and share the picture of us all together. Anyway, this text gives you an introduction to process theology. And in process theology, the really one of the big differences in process theology is that process understands that God is part of each and every actual entity, that God is related to each of us, so that God is inherently relational rather than something being external to us or to the world. And God is internally related, relational, not just with me and you, nor just with other humans, but with all entities, all actuality. So that's the first point that's particularly important, that we are relational. Relationality is really important. It's a core building block of understanding reality. And the second is experience. Rather than talk about reality being built by atoms and neutrons, which it is, of course, it's also built upon experience. That even at its micro level, entities have experience. So you and I have experience, and that's conscious, intentional experience, but there's also experiencing happening with others. And so we are made up of those experiences, those memories and those experiences. Our relationships with each other, with ourself, with our own past, our imaginings about the future, and with God. And we experience the world in this relational way, whether or not we're naming it explicitly or not. That's what reality is made up of. Secondly, or thirdly, the future is open. Things are not put in place and then a button, push play, and then it goes. So this is another way in which process theology offers a sometimes different perspective than many of our other Christian theologians and philosophers have suggested. The life is not determined. History is not predetermined. There's not a predestination of whether or not you're going to be saved or not, nor a predestination of how events are going to play out. There thus is no, you can predict the future by taking some guesses, but you can't have an absolute assuredness of predicting the future. And that is for you or me or Nostradamus or your astrologer, let alone, and also for God. So the future is open for God as well, because God and us are in this together. We are not determined. There's an indeterminacy, and indeterminacy is the way that we talk about freedom in relation to entities that don't make conscious decisions, but there's an indeterminacy. We can see that in the way the water drops fall during a rainstorm. There's an indeterminacy about it. Heisenberg talks about this, the Heisenberg principle, in which you can't tell where different elements of the basic reality, the neutron, are going to be. There's not you can tell which direction an electron is going, or you can tell where it is. You can't tell both at the same time. It's indeterminate. So in other words, life is a little like a jazz improvisation. God is like the leader that offers suggestions, but we are free. Freedom and indeterminacy. We are free by necessity in process theology to decide upon how to respond to the past, to our own past, to those around us, and to God's lure or God's hope or God's asking us, go this way, or pushing us go that way. This is a good, highlighting what would be a good way of going. So we've got freedom, we've got independent, we've got relationality, freedom and indeterminacy, relationality, and then the next one is becoming. We are always in the process of becoming. This is related to the indeterminacy. We are not a static being. Even once you've made a decision, you're still in the process of becoming. You go on to the next moment. We're always in the process of becoming, in which each and every moment of time, through our relationships, are interrelated with a variety of different entities and with ourselves. And those entities can be from our own past. They can be from people around us. They can be from other entities around us, trees, birds, the air that we breathe, as well as God's possibilities, God's hopes. And we bring all of those things together in every moment. And when I say we, I mean each actual entity is doing this at every moment. This is at the core level, the base level of how reality works in process theology. The man that created process theology, or that was the founder of process theology, was Alfred North Whitehead. And as Coleman talks about in her chapter, and then from his metaphysics, which in a book called Process and Reality, then Charles Hartshorne and John Cobb, among others, have created a more developed theology from that metaphysics. But Whitehead was a physicist, And so he's going to talk about the base of reality as well, and what is the nature of reality itself is what he's getting at. And that's the case for us as well, and that God is related to each element of reality. So we've talked about relationality, we've talked about experience, we've talked about freedom and indeterminacy, and we've talked about becoming, and you can see how those things all kind of come together. And then another element is creativity, and this includes novelty. So this is a value in process theology's view about God, that God values creativity and novelty, putting things together in a new way. It's a value that in which the divine lure or the divine God's movement or hope that we go in a certain direction, and the process of our own deciding and becoming will create something new. Now, you can see how this is similar to, and you can perhaps hear Coleman from last week talking about making a way out of no way, in which there is no way, not giving up, noting that there's where there's a will, there's a way. Where there is God, there is a way. There is a becoming. There is a creativity that is valued and hoped for novelty. Now, for process theology, then, we are co-creators with God. We are co-creators with each other, and we are co-creators with all around us. We're co-creators with the birds. We're co-creators with the other entities in our world. Co-creators with our neighbors, with the strangers, as well as with God. And that the value in process theology, there is a value given to this thing called creative advance. That's what we hope life is and history is doing, advancing creatively, coming up with new ways of doing things, new ways of relating with each other, new ways of experiencing, new ways of helping each other grow, making ways out of no ways in which we can relate in most positive ways and most effective ways. So the creative advance is an overarching value. God lures or persuades us into deeper, more intense, that's also a value. Intensity is positive in process theology. We want big colors. We want intense experiences. We don't want humdrum. We don't want, we want, it feels really good. Intensity, harmony. So harmonious is not the same thing as being the same or being this together as consistent, right? It's not consistent, it's harmonious. We think about the jazz metaphor that I mentioned earlier. Harmony is not the melody. Harmony is a way in which the music, the sounds are a little bit off from the melody, and yet contribute in a positive way to make things more complex and come together in that moment of listening, in that note or the notes, when they come together, when you hear that listening, it's a complex sound. So God lures us or persuades us into being deeper, more intense, more harmonious, creative, and more life-giving, positive life-giving decisions. God's creativity is the source of novelty. We can talk some more about the details about God at a later time, but in process theology, there's an element, an aspect of God's being, or God's becoming, or God's quality of God is about novelty, offering new possibilities, seeing things in new ways. God also receives from us. God experiences what we experience. God experiences with us, feels what we feel. So God is a source of novelty and of our creativity. And basically what we're doing when we're being creative is we're incarnating that novelty. We're bringing that novelty into flesh and into being. The process of life, the process of history, the process of the world, and by the world I mean the whole universe, is about advancing and progressing toward greater inclusivity, greater beauty. And beauty is not a simple term that can be defined by one particular culture that says this person is beautiful or that person is beautiful or this is what beauty is. Beauty is about when the complexity, when conflict is turned into complexity, when harmonious relationships are happening, when justice is served in a way in which all benefit. Conflict is transformed into contrast and it adds to the all. Intensity is valued, as I said before, and a simple way of saying this, or a nice little phrase in which process theologians speak a lot, is the many become one and are increased by one. So if you ever want to know what the code words are to get into the process theology special room, you say the many have become one or becoming one, and then the person would say, and are increased by one. That's the code phrase that people are often saying. It's a core value, a core way of understanding the notion of reality and how it all happens. And as I've said before, the focus here is on becoming and not static being. Each and every entity is always in the process of becoming. And now, how we would interpret that in terms of Christianity is we would see Scripture as calling us toward that, calling us toward that which is holy. Scripture is understood contextually and communally because it is written in a particular context for a particular community, and our interpretations then and enactments of that Scripture are in the process of becoming as we relate with each other. We relate with our pasts, to each other, and bringing God's lure toward a future. That's Scripture's calling us to pay attention to God's persuasive ideas of visions for a future, for the way in which humans and all reality in the world, in the universe, can relate to each other, in which there is complexity, intensity, beauty, creativity, and we are all advancing toward greater harmony, in which the conflicts become contrasts and add to the beauty of the whole. Now, I told you we'd get back to God here, and God has two different natures. That is, there's the primordial nature of God. So we think of primordial as, sort of like before the amoebas became life, right? Before they're actually, before the pre-amoeba hints of life, that primordial nature. But this is also meant in terms of God, is that part of God that is prior to any of us at being around. God is necessarily related to the world, necessarily related to matter, to the universe, but not necessarily related to conscious decision-making, ethical decision-making entities. The primordial nature of God is this unchangeable aspect of God, in which God is always about love, always about creativity, always everlastingly about goodness and beauty, novelty, novel possibilities, and inclusivity. It's giving. God is always giving all of that to creation. Now, the consequent nature of God is the aspect of God that receives from creation, that receives from nature, receives from the universe, and is affected by whatever decisions that each of us and the whole of all creation make. These decisions that could be sinful for us in particular here on earth and with humans, they may fail, but God also perceives or feels, not just feels oh, I feel good about that over there. And feels it like it hits God as well, as loving and life-giving. So God brings these two natures together. And I've made this as a kind of symbol of that. Now, process relational feminism highlights these elements. We've talked a little bit about these already, so you may, hopefully they make sense. Experience is more fundamental than any system. So how do you experience something? How does it feel in your life? How does it work? How does it fit, not just in the moment, but your experience over time? Particularity reflects reality better than universalism. And I want you to think about that for a while, because I think a lot of people have been taught to think universal. Let's think universal. And particularity is much more the case in your own experience, because you only experience your particularity. And God experiences each of our particularities. So it's not a universalism that is trying to get at the lowest common denominator of all entities' experience, but rather the summation, bringing them all there in together. That's what God is experiencing, all of it. Praxis is understood as more important than an abstraction. Organism, or I shouldn't say that, I should say organicism, is better than dualism, that things are not related as spirit and matter, but rather there's an organic whole, that everything is kind of interrelated. Things that are perceived in the past, I should say in the past, not your past, but in the past of philosophically, things have often been related and understood in terms of dualism, in which there's spirit or mind, and then there's physical matter. And process theology does not believe that. Process theology argues against that, and rather argues that the mind and the body are organically whole, that perhaps something looks like a physical inert substance from the outside, but on the inside it's not. The similar way of talking about this, Rosemary Radford Luther talks about it as subjectivity is how I experience myself. Objectivity is how you experience me. You're experiencing me objectively, but I'm experiencing myself subjectively. Those are better words. Nature is not just. Nature is not just. Nature does not necessarily follow our rules about justice. Life is robbery, but persons are valuable. And those are important elements to think about as well. Nature doesn't follow our rules. There's also an openness to dialogue with science as another source of theology. And I think that's important for you to think about. Is that an important source for you in thinking about theology? Can science give you important information about what it means to be human? And can that be an important source in how you understand who God is and who we are and what we are to do? This can be psychology, this can be physics, this can be health science, this can be philosophy, this can be any kind of science or reflection that we humans can come up with. And the last one is that it is important to engage with other religious perspectives as dialogue partners, that we can learn something about ourselves and about reality from engaging with persons of other religions and other perspectives. You see things very differently than I do. We're looking at the same thing. I can learn more about the same thing we're looking at from learning from you what it looks like or is how it's experienced from your perspective. Now, the last point I want to make is the difference between constructive theology and systematic theology. And that is that constructive theology is the way in which we think about theology that engages us in the world as we construct our theological claims, because we are making those claims based upon our experiences and the experiences of those around us and the things that we've read and studied. We want to integrate all of those things together. We don't want to just say, this is my perspective and that's it, right? But we also want to be aware that this is a constructive endeavor. This is not merely systematic in the way that it is often understood, or traditionally understood, I should say, not necessarily the way that I teach it. When you get to systematic theology, those of you who are in the MDiv, we will note that systematic theology is not necessarily the way that people understand it, as there's a system and here you have to talk about this, and then you talk about this, and then you talk about this, and you talk about this. Constructive theology is reflecting upon the ways in which each element of your theological viewpoint is related and interrelated with each other element, and that you are not merely looking at what has been said before and trying to memorize that, but rather you are looking at what's been said before. You are engaging with your own experience, your own religious experience, and the religious experience in your religious community and those around you in your church. And then you are creating and constructing a theological system in which things make sense, in which you can name who God is, who we are, and what we are to do. And we'll see you in class, and thank you for your attention.